screen also. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Hi, Simon. How are you today?
Doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar presenting our State of Test Data Management in the Industry 2025. My name is Amitai Richman, Director of Product Marketing here at K2View, and with me is Simon McVeigh. Simon, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hey everybody, yeah, great to be here. So I run sales engineering for KTView, and looking forward to getting into this meaty topic today.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, what we did is we did a survey in the market asking people involved in test data management whether their organization's test data practices are more like the horse and carriage you see here in the picture or like a sleek sports car where the test data is fast and responsive and robust. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the first survey ever done on the topic. So it's really interesting to take a look at this data, and we're going to look at the data together in this webinar. Feel free, you guys in the audience, to ask questions to myself or Simon throughout. You can you can ask questions through the question mark on the top right part of the screen, and we'll have a Q&A at the end if you have any questions. And if we don't have time to answer your questions, then we'll get back to you after the webinar. Also, you'll see a paperclip on the top right of the screen. You can download the actual survey, the market research that we conducted, and also an analyst brief on K2View TDM. So without further ado, we're going to dive right into it. And we're going to ask you one of the questions we asked the respondents. Okay, so one of the questions we asked in this survey was, how would you rate your organization's compliance with data privacy regulations regarding test data? So A, is your organization, to the best of your knowledge, fully compliant with no sensitive data reaching lower environments? Or B, and now you guys please go to the poll section in the top right. There's a button there for the poll, so please find the poll. Your answers are anonymous, and you'll see the results tabulated in real time as you respond. And then we're going to compare your results and your answers to the survey results. So we'll see how well your this audience correlates with the survey that we did. So we said A is test data environments are fully compliant. Absolutely no PII, no sensitive data is in there or reaching there. B is we're mostly compliant, so we're doing a pretty good job keeping sensitive data out, but we may have sensitive data in these test environments. Or C, we're not compliant. So you guys please go ahead and vote. We'd appreciate it. And we'll just give it a few moments to see, and we'll continue, and we'll come back and discuss these results in a moment. So
Let's see
while
the
you,
votes coming in.
yep,
That's great.
while I'm going to tell you about the methodology, and then we'll come back to we'll come back to it. So first of all, let's share the survey results from the research, and then we'll see how you guys vote. So 93% of the people that we surveyed admitted to their organization being mostly compliant with data privacy regulations. And this indicates that there's an urgent need for organizations to make sure that they are compliant with GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, or industry-specific regulations like healthcare, HIPAA. So there are lots of ways, there are different techniques available in order to become compliant, for example, data masking or synthetic data generation. So we'll come back to that later. But let's just talk about the poll results. So far, we're seeing 60% are mostly compliant. 26% believe that their organization is fully compliant, and 13% are saying not compliant. And actually, when you think about it, mostly compliant and not compliant both means that you're not 100% compliant. So I think that's fairly similar to the results we saw in the poll. Simon, when you saw this statistic, what was your reaction to this data point?
My first reaction was exactly,
Mm,
because it's precisely the experience we have every time we go and talk to testing teams, QA teams, DevOps, IT managers, leaders, and typically they'll say something like, oh, we're working on it, right?
hmm
And that can mean that in some cases you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, because the first problem is like, how if you're working on it, right, the first stage is actually trying to find all of the places that you may actually be at risk and what your surface area is. And actually a lot of organizations get stuck even at that point,
hmm
because it's just very, very difficult in a large, complex, modern enterprise landscape to really have confidence that you've identified all of the actual surface risk area. So yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
exactly what I was. It validated my day-to-day experience.
Yeah, and I've shared this survey data just in the recent weeks with Gartner analysts that we speak to, and they were not surprised by this at all, because they're also speaking to their customers, and those customers are expressing their pain points as it relates to this particular issue of complying with the regulations, and asking Gartner, who should we speak to, who should we look at in terms of vendors, and what kind of techniques should we deploy in order to solve this problem. So they weren't surprised either. But I have to admit, I personally was surprised. Before it was a third-party research firm that did this market research, and if you would have asked me what percentage are not fully compliant, I would say maybe 50-50 at best. So because on one hand we are speaking to customers and prospects every day, like you said, and they're expressing the fact that they're not fully compliant and they want to be. On the other hand, I just assumed a lot of people are compliant, but it seems that there are a lot of companies out there that are not compliant. And yeah, it's, as you say, it's understandable because it's very difficult in complex data environments to nail down every particular um, piece of sensitive data and make sure that it's fully secure.
Well,
So,
and just to add to that, I
yeah,
think one of the problems here is, and we'll talk about some of the different aspects of this, but it's also a moving window. Right? So it's
yep,
constantly, I mean, what is mostly compliant today is only based on the knowledge of the rules and regulations that actually apply to the kind of areas that you're operating in,
hmm
whether geographically in terms of the industry, but it's a moving target. So it's constantly changing.
true. Let me tell you guys about the methodology we employed. So we surveyed 300 full-time professionals who are involved in test data management in a range of seniority levels, from team leaders in quality assurance, data engineers, data architects, um, up to CXO levels, CTOs, also compliance officers of different levels. 70% of the people we surveyed were in the United States and 30% in the United Kingdom. And we had a number of different industries. The two largest in terms of representation were financial services, 40%, and healthcare, 20%. So when I think about test data management, I like to break down organizations into two buckets. One bucket are enterprises that have commercial tools for TDM, for test data management, and those that do not. Now, Gartner publishes an annual hype cycle on data security where they talk about how much the test data management tooling has penetrated the market. And they estimate around 20% of the target audience have adopted TDM tooling. Now, when we did this survey, we asked the people that do have commercial TDM tools, um, what percent, what kind of tools that you have, and 90% are using legacy tools. So these are tools created by the pioneers in the industry of test data management, and these are more than 15 years old. And we also asked them, are you planning? Are you happy with these tools? Are you satisfied? Are you planning to leave? And everybody said, everybody that had these legacy tools saying that they are looking at modern alternatives. So, Simon, why, in your experience, are so many enterprises looking to move away from legacy TDM tools? What are the drivers for that?
Well, I think to answer that, the first thing we have to kind of look at is what environment were these tools originally created to handle? Because in many cases, whether you look at, some of the old guard in terms of the kind of relational database world at that time, there was a lot of that. That really was the main focus, is that you had these kind of large monolithic environments, typically on premise. That were focused around, the likes of Oracle, IBM, these large databases, and that was the kind of approach. It was looking at, okay, how do we test relational databases, how do we test and how do we also mask and protect as well. And a lot of the solutions have just not kept up with what's happened since then, which
Hmm.
is obviously huge data sprawl. You've got, so many, just an explosion of different environments and technologies. I mean, we literally see almost every week there is a new favorite, highly distributed, highly scalable database that nobody had heard of before.
Hmm.
We've seen, for example, the rise of CockroachDB and Yugabyte, and a lot of different types of cloud-based, cloud-native, highly scalable deployment. And then you add to that, now we've got the sprawl of applications, SaaS applications, that's happened over the last 10 years. And each one of them brings a unique set of challenges. And one of the biggest ones actually is not just it's not just the process of actually masking, but being able to do this consistently across a lot of different systems, so that you make sure that the data, that the accuracy and the fidelity of the data is preserved for downstream testing, actually becomes a really complex engineering challenge when you've got that many systems. And so,
Hmm.
they just have not been able to keep up. And even within some of the modern alternatives that are out there, they tend to be very myopic in that they focus around either specific applications, a small number of endpoints, or they have, in some cases, architectures that will rule them out of handling data in a certain way. I know we'll get into that more, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's just that the tooling is just not fit for purpose, and that's why we've seen so many organizations planning to switch. Well, 100% is quite
Yeah,
a bold statement.
another surprising number from this survey. And another way to think about it is organizations moving to an agile software development methodology. We'll talk about that later. And the way that test data is provisioned is not in an agile fashion. So moving on to the next key insight from this survey is that we saw a consistent theme emerge from many of the questions in the survey. And I'm reminding whoever wasn't here in the first few minutes, you can download the entire survey in the research. There's a paperclip on the top right of your screen. You can download the survey and study it afterwards. And one of the things that you'll see when you read through the questions and answers is a consistent theme where the answers given by C-level executives and the answers given by people responsible for test data on the ground are dramatically different, where the C-level executives are expressing satisfaction in the tooling. They are very happy or believe that they have very high test coverage, for example, and they believe the test data processes are great. But when you ask the people on the ground who are, using the test data, provisioning test data, waiting for test data, they are not happy campers, to put it mildly. So there's a very consistent disparity between the two. And what I would say here is that organizations looking to really understand what's going on as it relates to test data, perhaps they should consider doing anonymous surveys, circulating anonymous surveys amongst employees and asking them these kind of questions. Do you believe your test data environments are fully compliant? Are PII in fact not exist in these in these environments? Are you satisfied with how quickly you can get test data? How good is the test coverage that you have, et cetera, et cetera. Ask these questions anonymously and see what the results are. That would be my advice for management. Simon, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this to me was another big head nod when we were look through the results, and it's interesting because this is quite it's not solely unique to this kind of
Test
space,
data specifically, yeah.
but it is definitely more acute here than I've ever seen it in any other, kind of area that I've worked in. And a lot of the times, yeah, you can get misalignment between leadership and those on the ground, but here it's very acute. And I think as we've been engaging with so many different organizations, this is exactly the problem that we see. We often hear from teams on the ground who will be telling us, just how bad the picture is,
Hmm.
and then when we come to talk about, why is this not being prioritized as a C-level problem, a lot of
Hmm.
the times I think the answer is actually very simple. And the problem is being masked by people. It's being covered up a lot of the time by the teams, not necessarily with the intention, but everybody's so focused on getting the release out, doing whatever they need to do. They don't
Hmm.
necessarily imagine that there might be a significantly better way to handle the problem. So it's almost like this kind of assumed pain. And that assumed pain is kind of handled by throwing more people at the problem. That you wouldn't necessarily get the metrics that are looking into how many releases got missed. And if they didn't get missed, how many people and extra hours over the weekend, nights, and whatever did it take to make sure that it didn't get missed? And I
Hmm.
think an even better question is, if it was a lot easier and there were, less heavy lifting involved, what could the speed of the release cycle look like, and where would that get the company if it was repeated again and again over time? If you were able to release every month in smaller, more reliable, consistent release cycles, and you could do that with less effort, then what would that mean for the business, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, this is a really, I think this is probably one of the most important metrics that I saw in the entire report, right?
Hmm.
Is this disconnect, and it has to be addressed. It really does.
Yeah, and I'm speaking from a hypothetical perspective, but theoretically, software testers really benefit from production data, even if it's real data. That they're not looking to misuse it, but they can test the applications well with real data. And so, they might not be carefully checking to see whether there's any PII in there because they're just interested in getting their test done, and that's their job. But if there's people responsible at other levels to make sure that they're fully compliant with regulations, they may not be informed of what's actually going on the ground. Okay, so let's move on to the next data point. We asked who is responsible for test data in your organization, and 50% said that software developers and testers are doing it. Now, remember, as I said before about the two buckets, some of the respondents, they have commercial tools, and some of them are doing it manually. Now, especially in the organizations which are relying on manual processes for provisioning test data. So when developers and testers are involved in spending a lot of time, significant amount of their time, looking for test data, creating test data to run their tests, that takes away from their core responsibility of coding or testing. So it's an issue. Um, and, you know, um, different vendors use the word self-service in a different way. Vendors like to say that their tool is self-service. But what does self-service really mean? I mean, Simon, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, this is it's an area that I think it does get misused a lot because self-service could literally mean that you're allowing people to write SQL queries themselves. So what does that really dramatically speed up anything? And I think the key here is self-service has to come with dramatic simplicity. In it has to simplify the process, the end-to-end process significantly. There's no point just exposing all of the complexity that's happening, but just doing it through a UI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus a script. I think another point I'd make here when I see that graph on the pie chart on the right hand side is it doesn't within that, like you can imagine, it breaks down on the right hand side into a lot of different subsets, and those subsets are which percentage of developers and testers who are provisioning test data themselves are doing it to a level that meets the quality standards that the actual teams need.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can be, yeah, they're provisioning it, but I mean, we were talking to an organization the other day, and their script that they're currently managing, which obviously doesn't scale, literally sets all the dates of birth across all of their insurance policies to the same date as
Mm-hmm.
part of the masking process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine trying to use that as a QA team. It's just it's lost all its usefulness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just because they're managing does not mean that they're meeting, and it's no fault of their own. It's a very difficult problem that they've been given,
Mm-hmm.
and so everybody's kind of struggling along, wasting time on it, and not necessarily even then getting to where they need to.
And it's frustrating, right? Besides the fact that it's time consuming and it's not, they're being less productive on their core responsibility. But a lot of people find this gathering of test data and manually preparing these data sets to be very, looking for a needle in the haystack sometimes, and it's really tough. And if you have a solution that's helping you do that quickly and trouble free, that could really improve satisfaction, employee satisfaction internally. So we asked the respondents, what are your top 3 use cases for synthetic data? And interestingly, only 3% said they have no use for synthetic data. Edge case testing was the most common response. And we saw that especially in the financial services industry, so banking and insurance companies, especially said that they're using synthetic data to test. For example, I'm just speculating here, but they said edge case testing, but that could be, for example, um, new functionality, for example, for a consumer-facing app or a new schema. So that's and functional testing as well was a very common use for synthetic data. Simon, any thoughts on that? What when you speak to people in the market, what is their level of interest in synthetic data?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that we've seen a huge spike in interest. Actually, it comes in a lot of different scenarios. But I think, the biggest vision that has captured people's imagination when it comes to synthetic data and has real, measurable kind of business value impact is creating an air gap between production and the lower environments, right? So basically I mean, the holy grail is that you would be able to essentially automatically bring up an environment, hydrate it with exactly the data that you need aligned to each of your test cases. It would be 100% synthetic, but highly accurate. You'd run through your automated test and then you tear down the environment and you'd automate the entire end-to-end flow. That's really the holy grail, and I think the advent of technologies like LLMs, like people using ChatGPT, they've definitely started actively looking into. Well, surely we've closed the gap. Surely you can do that. Now, anybody who's actually tried to generate high quality synthetic data for a complex enterprise set of systems, not just a few tables in a database, and do that with ChatGPT, will know how unreliable and how hard that is to do. As soon as you break past a few tables or a few hundred rows, the whole thing really kind of breaks down, just because there's a lot of complexity, and this is not a place that you want to have hallucinations. Hallucination and referential integrity do not go very well together. So, but yeah, it's a huge area of interest, and definitely I think we're seeing the gap close as to the dream versus the reality.
Great. Okay, so we spoke briefly about software methodology, and I don't think it'll come to any surprise that most people are now agile in their organizations, and those that are still waterfall are planning to switch. So I don't think that's going to come as any great shock. I think we should move along to the top challenges in managing test data. So consistent with the first stat we talked about in
Amitai,
terms of,
sorry to interrupt. I don't know if
yeah,
it's just for me, but
yeah.
this, we're still on the pie chart slide. So at least from what I can see.
Okay, let me and share screen and my screen share and share screen again. Let's see if that does the job.
Just while you're doing that, we do have a question. One of the questions. Do you want to wait until the end for questions, or?
Up to you. If you want to take it now, go
Yeah, I mean,
ahead.
it's exactly related to what we were
Go
talking
ahead.
about. So Dwayne had asked, is synthetic data viable and reliable for integration testing scenarios? Are we anticipating that Gen AI will move us closer to full synthetic data sets, test data sets? And yeah, exactly, we are. But again, I think the key here is to just do it with, you know, the kind of ChatGPT based approach. It's a big engineering challenge that can't just be done by a bit of prompt engineering. Mainly when you get into the complexities of ensuring referential integrity, like dealing with high cardinality fields, even relationships between different attributes in the same document or table. So there's a lot of technical complexity in there, but yes, it's definitely on the rise in a big way.
Thanks. Simon, can you see the top challenges in managing test data now?
Yep. Yeah, we can.
Okay. So the number one concern or challenge was PI discovery. 40% said that this is their top concern. Other challenges include CI/CD pipeline integration for test data. A lot of people are still doing scripting in order to extract data and provision test data. So these are common themes that we hear. In fact, let's move on to the next poll question, and we'll come back to this one. So remember, guys, there's a poll button on the top right. If you could please let us know, does your organization use commercial tools to provision or generate test data? So we're asking essentially, do you have a commercial TDM tool or a synthetic data generation tool that you're using for software testing? A, yes, B, no, or C, in the process of acquiring tooling. So please head on over to the poll and vote. Are we seeing the poll?
Yeah, I still see the old poll, the previous
Hold on.
poll. I don't know, maybe it's
Hold on a
just on my
second.
side.
Let me check on. Okay. No, I think it's live now. I think it's working. You need to sort of go back to the list and see the second poll.
Yeah, we've got people polling now.
Okay, great. Just give it. We'll come back to this poll in a moment. Let's keep on going. You guys can keep on voting, please. So let's just, going back to the challenges that we started talking about, Simon. So putting it all together, what we spoke about today, we spoke about 93% of respondents who said they have PII in lower environments. And we talked about gaps in legacy tooling. So how do we bridge the gaps between leadership and people on the ground, like we spoke about? How do we empower QA and developers to access their own test data? And how do we put synthetic data into the hands of developers and testers so that they can maximize test coverage, as you said before, Simon? So, how do you map out and match between these challenges and concerns that we hear in the market, and what to look for?
Yeah, I mean, these are exactly the most common problems, and I think within each of these areas, there's you could have another 10 to 15 things that you kind of see behind it. I think the main thing I would say is this can serve as a bit of a map for you, as if you're in the process of kind of going out and looking for vendors, like understanding the players in the market. These capabilities are really what we've found that consistently will make the difference for a true, like a QA team, especially in a large organization where you've got a lot of complexity. If you have to have each one of these well covered. Now, you might not start with something like synthetic data generation, right?
Yep.
Perhaps you're starting from just making sure that you can handle your current state, that you know where your PII is, that you can do. I mean, even something as seemingly small as subsetting data. I mean, just think about that for a moment, how critical that becomes. A lot of organizations that we're dealing with and working with, they are in a full copy of production mindset. I call it
Yep.
this full copy mindset. They basically take an entire copy of their production database, they run it through some sort of masking process, scramble the data, not necessarily preserve any of the fidelity of that data, but definitely desensitize it as best they can, and then they give that to the testing teams. Now that has a lot of trade-offs. Like I come from an architecture background, I always think in the way of trade-offs. And the biggest trade-off for that is that you then need to have massive lower environments. You need, everything becomes more expensive to manage. Things take longer. There's just more complexity. So the idea of going and doing a subset and being able to do that consistently and say, for example, I want, customers that live in Texas and I want them to have this particular profile. And across my 5 different systems, I get a single subset of data, right? That means that the testing team now can just reduce the volume of data that they need for their tests, which means you can have lower environments. There's huge savings in being able to move to a simpler non-prod environment and have it be managed. So I'm just picking one example there, but I would definitely encourage you to use this as a guide. Make sure that any solution out there that you're assessing has these things really well covered.
Yeah, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a bit about ourselves and introduce ourselves at K2View. Simon, could you give us the
Yeah,
one minute elevator pitch, if you will?
absolutely. Yeah, and then I think we're going to actually get into to doing a bit of a demo here as well. To everybody loves a good demo, right? So
Yeah.
we'll dive in and see. But yeah, the main thing to take away, I mean, K2View has been around for a while. We kind of really cut our teeth, as it were, in really complex, large scale kind of environments where you've got a lot of complexity, and the likes of AT&T been one of our largest customers for many years. Verizon, Vodafone, we've seen expansion in the last 3 years into a whole flurry of new industries, new verticals, all the way through from retail into insurance, into banking. Banking is actually a huge area that we're seeing, understandably, a lot of concerns about sensitive data and regulatory risk. And the main thing I would say to take away from this, aside from the fact that we're a serious company that deals with serious organizations, at very large scale, is by way of doing that, we're very used to complex environments with very high regulation. That translates into us having a very flexible deployment architecture. We're used to very stringently managed environments and operating at scale. And that also means that we have to have very broad connectivity as well, because anything from your mainframe, we still see a lot of mainframe out there that we have to deal with, and we do, all the way through to some of those databases I mentioned recently, like something like Cockroach,
Hmm.
or whatever new flavor it is that's coming out. So it's a very very feature-rich platform that has a lot of capability, and I think that's what we're going to have a quick glimpse into now.
Yeah, and before I hand over to you, Simon, just to shout out that if you are a Gartner subscriber out there, you can ask them about K2View. We're in Gartner's Magic Quadrant. We're a visionary. So feel free to ask Gartner or any of the analysts listed here what they think about K2View. So I'm going to stop sharing. Simon, if you can take over, please, and share with us just a quick glimpse, if you will,
Great.
on what
Yeah,
our TDM looks like.
I will do that. So just quickly jump over here. Hopefully it doesn't cause a cascading window here.
No, we're good.
Okay, so you should be able to see what looks kind of like an enterprise, like basically an ERD, entity relationship diagram. So can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I want you to imagine for a moment, I'm going to show you some really quick kind of scenes, as I like to call them, just to give you a glimpse, right? So we're not going to run through all of this in detail. We can definitely do deeper dive follow-ups. But think about for a moment. Imagine in the InfoSec team, and I'm basically responsible for ensuring that we actually identify and classify any occurrence of sensitive data across the organization. Now, you may have an enterprise data catalog already that you're using, whether it's, it could be Calibra, Big ID, Elation, and we're very used to working in sync with those types of solution, but it's important to have this layer of protection that is, very closely tied to the actual process of not only masking and desensitizing and anonymizing data, but also provisioning data into your lower environments. The catalog is a really, really important layer of protection. So I'm here as an InfoSec lead, and let's say I've got this scenario where I've got to check whether we've properly classified a new database that has been recently kind of added, right? And so I go through, I would have gone into my monitor here, I would have selected, this would actually be running on an automated basis, by the way. It can be triggered via an API call, it could be run on a schedule, it could be in response to specific events as well. And as I've gone through and run this, it's basically crawled over the data, and it's looked at not only the structure of the data, but it's also looked at the data itself, profiled that, and it's run it through a whole series of different, we call them plugins, but it's basically configurable sets of assessment, all the way through to even running this through a large language model. Now, this is something that we've found in our testing over the last year. We've made a big focus around using AI to actually handle the discovery process, not only discovering sensitive data in places that you would never have thought to write a rule for, and I'm talking about in different languages in some cases, or vertical industry specific terminology. This example we're going to look at in a minute is medical related, but also being able to document. We're actually using the LLM to do the documentation as well at a field by field level. Just imagine that. I mean, yes, it won't be as good as the DBA who's been dealing with this for 20 years, but it can be a great starting point to understand what data is actually captured. So we go through that, and it is a very configurable plugin module. In fact, we actually added this ability here to categorize medical information. And that was done purely through configuration. I won't go into how we do that right now, just for the sake of time. But the end result is, I've got my 3 different databases here. And if I go into the patients DB here, um, I can see a breakdown of all of the relationships between these different fields. If the relationships don't exist at the database level, we can actually profile the data and suggest and identify places that there's just natural correlations and overlap with different columns across different tables. So there's a lot of functionality in here, but let's just take an example. Like up here, we've got this table that was added, and we have basically a name, first name in German, and this has been identified automatically as and classified as a first name and classed as PII. And you'll see if I open this up, the origin of that classification is LLM data profiling. But not only that, the description that has been added is basically automatically generated based on the data that it's looking at. Now I can, I could keep going here. We've got even in some cases, we've asked the catalog to identify where we've got medical attributes and flag that with an attribute here. So it's very flexible. You can add any number of different elements, and you really start to use AI to not only identify this information, but also start to catalog it, start to document it, and help improve the level of visibility that you have into all of the enterprise data that's out there. These, with a bit more time, I would go into what it means to have classifications. This is kind of how we actually control the masking process. So if I take a social security number, we have a generator for that. We have a whole library of different generators for this. So if I open up here, you can build your own rules, and you can use our library of different rules as well. We also have the very, very important that you can actually do this consistently. So imagine I have 10 different databases or tables, or actually I should say systems. This could be, systems like Salesforce, like Workday. It could be on-premise Oracle databases. We have to ensure consistency across all of that data. So every time that I find a social security number, I'm going to mask it to the same social security number, or the same fake first name and last name, or the same fake email address that we give. It's really important to basically have that consistency, and we have that all kind of built in here. Just before I switch over to the next quick demo I'm going to show, how's the pace, Amitai? Is this coming through okay?
Yeah, you have just a few minutes left, Simon. I think we'll have to sacrifice the Q&A to just show a few minutes of TDM if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'll actually I'll do this really quickly because I think there's just one visual that will really help you understand the process that we're going through here. So let's say now I'm actually a QA lead. I'm a tester who needs to get access to data, right? So what I can do is I can literally just open up a task. I've got one I've created here, and I just need to fill in these different steps. So from production, right, I can decide to take customers. It's automatically masked. Now, this is not a table, right? This is us saying it's an entity which can go across a lot of different systems and different applications and tie it all together into a single business entity. So you're only moving customers. You're not having to worry about all the ins and outs of what that really means. That's all been handled by a DBA in the background before you get to this point. So it really, back to my point before, it really simplifies this process.
So this is for testers to run,
Exactly.
and not
Yes.
necessarily DBAs. Could be DBAs, but certainly doesn't need to be.
Exactly. Yeah. So you basically, this is freeing you as a tester from the responsibility of having to know all the ins and outs of the data that you're working with. Now you just say, I want customers. I want them to fit these kind of criteria. So I might say I want them to have a billing issue, and maybe they've come from a particular state, and you'll see that it's basically filtering down to find exactly that subset. And so let's say I want to take 10 of those. Now, when I get to the test data store, I can decide, do I want to create a snapshot that I can roll back to later? And then also, where do I want to load this data? And so I could just say, instead of this server and this database, you just say which environment, and that's a collection of different systems. We'll say delete it if you find it already, load it, and then reserve it for my exclusive use, right? So while I'm testing. That's literally all it takes to provision data into your LoRa environments. So think about how long that takes you today. If you had to get real data from production, find exactly the records you care about, mask it, and then move it into a LoRa environment, how long would it take and how many people would you need to involve? And then the last thing I'll just quickly share is, what about synthetic data? Well, here I have an example where I'm actually using rules-based synthetic data generation, and I can design my ideal data set just by specifying these parameters, right? So I've said I want them to be in Texas, in the city of Austin, credit card of American Express, and I could then even say, like, how many cases do I want them to have? I could decide the distribution of those cases. These are related to customer, right? So it's ensuring complete referential integrity, allowing you to design a data set that you want, and then be able to provision that into the UAT environment. So again, we treat synthetic data as a first-class citizen. It's dealt with exactly the way that we deal with production data, except you're able to create that air gap between production and the LoRa environments by synthetically creating data from scratch. That's all we've got time for on the demo front. So
Yeah, but
hopefully,
yeah, Simon, just one last question, please. Could you
yeah.
just explain briefly? I saw their AI-based synthetic data generation. When would you use that? What's the use case for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me just quickly bring this up so we can still see the screen. Okay, so yeah, so there is a challenge that comes up when you say, okay, I've got this large, complex set of databases usually, and there's so many variations within that data that I have no idea as a DBA even what they are. There's all sorts of different cohorts, so I can't create rules because I don't know what the logic would be. And so, but I want to be able to synthetically recreate this environment in my in my non-prod kind of tiers without having to encodify all of that into rules. And so we've made the process of being able to train a generative AI model on your data. So you take your training data set, you can send that to a dedicated cluster that does the AI training. You don't need any technical knowledge to do that. You literally would just, instead of sending this data to a test environment, well, it would probably be more appropriate to show it here, or as extracting data, and you send it to AI training. And then what you can do is, once you've trained the model, you'd be able to create a task that actually generates highly accurate, anonymized, non-sensitive data using that model. I know we don't have time to go through that right now, but yeah, that's definitely an area that we're seeing a lot of traction, and it could be used for all sorts of different downstream uses. Oh, you're on mute, Amitai.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Ran a bit over time, but if any of this is of interest to you guys in the audience, feel free to go to our website, k2view.com, and fill in the contact us form or request a demo. And we'll be happy to talk about your particular situation and talk about your challenges and how you see the market. So feel free to reach out to us, and any questions that you guys have submitted, we'll follow up after the session. Thank you, Simon, very much, and thank you everyone for attending. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.